Hi everyone, before we do our practice problem, let's review absolute and relative comparisons. Absolute comparisons are comparing one unit with the same unit, like number of phones versus number of phones. Anytime you're comparing one thing with the same thing somewhere else, that's absolute. There's no math involved. Relative comparisons involve comparing two units with the same two units again, like people per phone compared to people per phone, or miles per gallon to miles per gallon, or people per car to people per car. It's two units with the same two units. Now, it may require you to calculate the rate or percent yourself. It's not always going to be given to you, so even if it doesn't say per, if per is involved in some way, it's probably still relative. So here's our example. We need to use the table below to make an absolute comparison involving speeders and a relative comparison involving speeders. Absolute is absolutely the easiest because there's no math involved. All you have to do is simply look at the numbers. Now, because it's asking us to look at speeders, we only need to look at this column. As you can see, within this column, 49 is the biggest number, so that means that area 2 has the most speeders. So that would be our absolute comparison. Now, because we need to include the data, you might want to mention that area 2 has 49, whereas areas 1 and 3 only have 34 and 6. I'm not going to write that here because I'm kind of low on space, but if this were your quiz or this were a practice problem for yourself, you would write that. Okay, now this is where the work is actually going to come in. In order to do our relative comparison, we have to do something involving a rate, a percent, something of that sort. So here, it's helpful to look at the speeders and the non-speeders and turn it into a percent. As you can see, percent involves the word per, so that's how you know you're making a relative comparison. Now in these situations, as you can see, we have speeders and non-speeders, which are part and part. We can't do percent when it's part and part. We have to use part whole. So we need to actually know what the whole is. In this case, just drivers in general. So if I have in area 1, 34 speeders and 10 non-speeders, that's 44 drivers. So that means that I have 34 speeding out of the 44 drivers. Now in my calculator, if I do top divided by bottom, since that's how you switch to a decimal, you get 0.77277, etc. I only need the first two, so I cut right there between the 7 and the 2. I look at the 2 before I cut it off. As you can see, it's less than 5, so that means that my 0.77 is just 0.77. So we're going to call that 77%. So that's area 1. Okay. Now, let's go ahead and look at area 2. Area 2, still have to do our addition, so we have 49 plus 55 ends up being 104 drivers. So I simply do 49 divided by 104. I end up with 0.47115, etc. I'm cutting it between the 7 and the 1. No rounding involved because we're just chopping off the 1. It's smaller than 5, so it's 47%. So right now we have 77%, 47%. And now we have our last one, number 3. So number 3, this one's a lot easier because the numbers are smaller. It ends up being 6 speeders out of 7 total drivers, which in our calculator is 0.8571, and a bunch more numbers, but we only need the first 2. So we cut. The 7 tells the 5 to bump up because anything 5 or higher will bump it up. So the 7 bumps the 5, and we end up with 86%. Notice how we had to do a lot of math for this problem. Now, technically, we have not answered the question because we have not made our comparison yet. We did all this lovely math, we have our percents, but we haven't answered the question. So our relative comparison would simply be that area 3 has the highest percent of speeders. And of course, we would mention that it's 86% versus the 77% or the 47%. So you would just write area number 3 has the highest percent of speeders. So as you can see, when you're dealing with absolute, it's absolutely the easiest. There's no math involved. You just pick the answer. Whereas relative, you have to do some sort of calculation, where the calculation has to be given to you. It involves a rate, might even include the percent, something of that sort.